The rain poured relentlessly over Manhattan, painting the city in a mosaic of glistening lights and reflections. Inside a luxurious penthouse overlooking Central Park, Claire Westwood sat alone in a sprawling living room that could rival the size of a ballroom. The emptiness of the space felt as heavy as the weight pressing on her chest. Her hand instinctively went to her belly, the faint swell beneath her palm a quiet reminder of the life growing within her, a life her husband, Adrian Westwood, seemed utterly indifferent to. Adrian, CEO of Westwood Enterprises, was the epitome of success. With piercing blue eyes, chiseled features, and an impeccable sense of style, he commanded every room he walked into, but his charm and charisma, which had once swept Claire off her feet, had been replaced by cold detachment. Lately, his late-night meetings, endless business trips, and clipped responses made her feel more like a stranger in their home than his wife. As the clock struck midnight, the familiar click of the elevator door signaled Adrian's return. Claire straightened, smoothing the silk of her nightgown, hoping tonight might be different. She turned as he entered, his tailored suit pristine despite the weather, his phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, I need that report by tomorrow morning," he said, his voice sharp, his attention nowhere near her. "Adrian," she began softly, her voice barely cutting through the tense air, "can we talk?" He held up a finger, signaling her to wait as he finished his call. When he finally ended it, he sighed heavily, his gaze brushing over her before landing on the glass of scotch he kept on the counter. "What is it, Claire?" "I'm exhausted," he muttered, pouring himself a drink. Claire felt her courage waver, but she pressed on. "It's about the baby." He froze for a moment, then took a long sip of his scotch, his expression unreadable. "What about it?" The casual dismissal in his tone sent a chill through her. "Adrian, this isn't just about me. It's about us, about our family." Adrian set his glass down with a clink and ran a hand through his hair. "Claire, I've told you before, I'm dealing with a lot right now. The company is going through a critical phase. I can't be distracted." "Distracted?" Her voice cracked, the hurt seeping through. "Our child is not a distraction." He exhaled sharply, his patience visibly thinning. "Can we not do this tonight?" That was the moment Claire realized she was talking to a wall. The man who had once promised her the world now seemed incapable of even noticing her pain. "I'm not sure there's much left to discuss," she whispered, her voice trembling. Adrian didn't respond. He simply downed the rest of his drink and walked out of the room, leaving her standing alone with tears streaming silently down her cheeks. The following morning, Claire made a decision. She could no longer endure the suffocating loneliness or the constant feeling of being invisible in her own marriage. Packing her things didn't take long. She hadn't brought much of herself into Adrian's world to begin with. She left him a simple note on the counter. "Adrian, I've decided to leave. This isn't the life I want for myself or our child. I hope you find what you're looking for. Claire." When Adrian returned home that evening, he noticed the silence immediately. The usual faint hum of music Claire played in the background was absent. He called out her name, his voice echoing through the penthouse. There was no response. He entered their bedroom, finding the drawers half empty and her closet eerily barren. Panic bubbled up in his chest as he rushed to the kitchen, spotting the note on the counter. He read it once, then twice, the words slicing through him like shards of glass. Adrian had always been in control of his company, his image, and his life, but in that moment he felt everything slipping through his fingers. He tried calling her, but the number went straight to voicemail. His next call was to her best friend, Emily, who answered with a hesitant, "Hello? Where is she?" Adrian demanded, his voice unsteady for the first time in years. "Adrian, maybe you should let her go," Emily said gently. "She's been unhappy for a long time. She needs peace." His jaw clenched. "Emily, tell me where she is." "I can't do that," she replied, her tone resolute. "She deserves space, Adrian. Give her that." Adrian hung up, frustration coursing through him. He sat down at the counter, staring at the note, his mind racing. Claire had always been there, quiet, patient, understanding. He had taken her presence for granted, assuming she would never leave. But now she was gone. Claire, meanwhile, had found refuge in a small coastal town far from the chaos of Manhattan. The air here was fresh, the pace of life slower, and for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. She rented a modest cottage overlooking the ocean, spending her days preparing for the baby, and her evenings watching the waves crash against the shore. Despite the serenity, Her heart ached. She had loved Adrian deeply, but love wasn't enough when it wasn't reciprocated. She knew she had done the right thing by leaving, yet the thought of raising their child alone filled her with both determination and sorrow. One afternoon, as she sat on the porch knitting a tiny blanket, a car pulled up to the driveway. Her breath caught when she recognized the sleek black vehicle. Adrian stepped out, looking completely out of place in his expensive suit against the rustic backdrop. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Adrian took a hesitant step forward, his expression a mix of regret and desperation. "Claire," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone guarded. He ran a hand through his hair, his usual composure unraveling. "I was a fool, Claire. I didn't see what I was losing until you were gone. I've made so many mistakes, but I can't lose you. I won't." Her eyes filled with tears as she clutched the blanket in her lap. "It's not that simple, Adrian." "I know," he said, his voice breaking, "but I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. Just come back home, or let me stay here with you. I don't care about the company or anything else. I just want you and our baby." Claire searched his face, looking for sincerity, and found it in the raw emotion shining through his usually stoic exterior. But could she trust him? Could he truly change? Adrian stood on the porch, the sea breeze tousling his usually perfect hair. He looked smaller here, almost vulnerable, nothing like the confident billionaire CEO Claire had known. For the first time in their relationship, she felt she had the upper hand, yet it didn't bring her any satisfaction. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, where the baby shifted gently, as if sensing the tension in the air. "Adrian," she said finally, her voice steady but laced with exhaustion, "you don't get to just show up here and say you're sorry. Do you know how many nights I cried myself to sleep? How many times I tried to get through to you, only to be dismissed like I didn't matter?" He stepped closer, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel driveway. "I know, Claire, and you're right. I failed you, over and over again. I prioritized everything else but you, and I hate myself for it." She turned her face away, unwilling to let him see the tears threatening to spill. "Hate yourself all you want, Adrian. It doesn't undo the damage." For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the distant crash of waves. Adrian's shoulders slumped, his usual confidence stripped away. "Let me make it right," he pleaded. "I'll stay here. I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you that I've changed." Claire shook her head, her voice rising. "Changed? Adrian, people don't change overnight. What happens when the novelty of this wears off? When the company calls or some crisis comes up? Will I just become an afterthought again?" "I've already stepped back from the company," Adrian said, his tone urgent. "I handed over day-to-day operations to the board. I needed to come here, to you." Claire's head snapped toward him, disbelief etched across her face. "You stepped back?" she asked, her voice tinged with both surprise and skepticism. "You'd never even take a day off before." Adrian nodded, taking another step closer. "Because I thought that's what success meant. Working tirelessly, building an empire. But none of it matters without you, Claire. I thought I was protecting us, providing for us, but I was just pushing you away." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. Claire's mind raced as she tried to reconcile the Adrian standing before her with the man she'd left behind. Could this really be the same person? Or was this just another fleeting moment of clarity that would fade as soon as real life intruded again? She gestured toward the small bench on the porch. "If you're staying, we need to talk. Really talk." Adrian followed her, sitting cautiously beside her, as if afraid one wrong move might shatter whatever fragile thread still connected them. His gaze drifted to her belly, his eyes softening. How is the baby?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Claire placed a protective hand over her bump. "Healthy, as far as I know. I've been going to all the appointments alone." The guilt in Adrian's eyes was palpable. "I should have been there," he said, his voice breaking. "I missed everything. The first ultrasound, hearing the heartbeat. I missed it all." "Yes, you did," Claire said bluntly. "And I had to carry all of it alone. The excitement, the fear, the uncertainty. I needed you, Adrian, and you weren't there." He reached out, hesitating before his hand rested lightly on hers. "Let me be here now," he said, his tone filled with desperation. "Please, Claire." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, they talked. For the first time in months they really talked. Claire poured out her heart, recounting the nights she spent crying in their enormous empty bed. She spoke of the loneliness, the resentment, and the deep sadness that had consumed her. Adrian listened, his usual defenses stripped away, his focus solely on her. "I didn't realize how far I'd pushed you," Adrian admitted, his voice trembling. "I thought if I worked harder, earned more, I could give you everything you deserved, but I see now that I gave you nothing that mattered." Claire studied him, her heart aching with a mix of longing and caution. "Words are easy, Adrian. Promises are easy, but actions, they're what matter. I'll show you," he said, his tone resolute. "Whatever it takes, I'll show you." The following days brought an uneasy rhythm to their lives. Adrian, true to his word, stayed in the small guest room at the back of the cottage. He traded his tailored suits for simple clothes, more suited to the laid-back coastal town, and seemed determined to prove his sincerity. He helped Claire with chores, brought her tea in the mornings, and even accompanied her to a prenatal appointment, his eyes welling up with emotion when he heard the baby's heartbeat for the first time. But despite his efforts, Claire struggled to let her guard down. Her heart wanted to believe in him, but her mind replayed the countless times he'd let her down before. One afternoon, as they walked along the shore, Adrian turned to her. "Why this place?" he asked. "Why did you come here?" Claire paused, gazing out at the horizon. "It's peaceful," she said simply. "I needed somewhere quiet to think, to figure out who I am without you." Her words stung, but Adrian nodded, understanding. "And have you?" he asked cautiously. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I'm still figuring it out." As the weeks passed, small moments of connection began to emerge. One evening, they cooked dinner together in the tiny kitchen, their movements awkward at first, but gradually becoming more natural. Another night, Adrian found an old guitar in the attic and played a clumsy rendition of a song Claire loved, making her laugh for the first time in months. But for every step forward, there were setbacks. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Adrian's phone buzzed with a message from the company. Claire's mood immediately soured, her fears and doubts rushing back. "You said you stepped back," she said, her tone sharp. "I did," Adrian replied, showing her the screen. "It's just a quick update, I won't respond." But the damage was done. Claire's walls went up again, and the tentative progress they'd made felt like it was slipping away. It wasn't until a storm rolled in one night that the dam finally broke. The wind howled outside, and the rain lashed against the windows. Claire, unable to sleep, found Adrian sitting in the living room staring into the fire. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, her voice soft. He looked up, his expression weary. "No, I keep thinking about everything I've done wrong." Claire sat beside him, the firelight casting flickering shadows on her face. "Adrian," she began hesitantly, "what are you really doing here? Is this about guilt, or do you actually want to be a father? A husband?" He turned to her, his eyes filled with raw emotion. "I want to be everything I wasn't before, Claire. For you, for our child. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I'm begging you for one." Her heart ached at his vulnerability, but she remained silent, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. Could she truly forgive him? Could she trust him to stay? To be the partner and father she needed? The storm raged on outside, but inside, a quiet hope began to flicker. For the first time in a long time, Claire allowed herself to imagine a future where they could rebuild what had been broken. The days rolled into weeks, each one marked by a tenuous dance of progress and setbacks between Adrian and Claire. Though she appreciated the small ways he showed he was trying, bringing her flowers from the market, cooking her breakfast, or sitting with her at the prenatal classes, Claire's heart remained guarded. Trust wasn't something she could grant easily, not after the months of neglect and the endless nights of loneliness. Yet deep down, she could feel a part of herself softening, a sliver of hope beginning to bloom. It scared her more than she cared to admit. One crisp morning, Adrian suggested they go into town together. "You've been cooped up in the house too much," he said, as he poured her a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice. "Let's get some air, explore a bit. There's a farmer's market down by the harbor." Claire hesitated. She'd kept her new life deliberately small and private, and the thought of stepping out with Adrian at her side felt like inviting the world back in. Still, she relented, telling herself it was just a short outing. The market was bustling, alive with the chatter of vendors and the scent of baked goods and salt water. Adrian stayed close to Claire's side, his presence drawing glances from passers-by. Even dressed in casual clothes, His aura of authority and wealth was unmistakable. As they wandered past colorful stalls, a woman approached them, a middle-aged vendor with a kind smile and a keen eye for details. "What a lovely couple," she remarked warmly, her gaze flickering to Claire's belly. "And congratulations. When's the little one due?" Claire stiffened, unsure how to respond, but Adrian stepped in smoothly. "End of May," he said, his voice carrying a pride that startled Claire. The vendor beamed. "First child, I assume?" "Yes," Adrian replied before Claire could correct him. His hand brushed against her lower back, a protective gesture that sent an unexpected warmth through her. "We're both very excited." Claire smiled politely, but her mind churned. Adrian's words and actions felt genuine, but was he truly excited? Or was this just part of the act? She hated how cynical she'd become, but she couldn't afford to get swept away by charm and promises again. Later that evening, as they sat by the fire with mugs of tea, Claire decided to confront the thoughts that had been simmering all day. "You told that vendor we're excited," she began, her voice carefully neutral. Adrian looked up, startled by the sudden shift in conversation. "Aren't you?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "I've been terrified from the moment I found out I was pregnant. And for months, I was alone in that terror." Adrian set his mug down and leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "Claire, I'm terrified too, but I don't want you to face any of it alone anymore. I know I can't erase the past, but I want to be here for you, for everything." Her throat tightened, the sincerity in his voice tugging at something deep inside her. "Words are easy, Adrian," she said softly, echoing her earlier sentiment. "Actions matter." "I know," he said, "and I'll prove it to you." But just as the fragile threads of their relationship began to weave together, an unexpected complication arose. Adrian received a call one evening while they were preparing dinner. The ringtone, sharp and intrusive, shattered the quiet peace of the moment. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening. "Work?" Claire asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. He nodded. "It's the board. They've been pressing me about a deal I stepped away from." Claire crossed her arms, her chest tightening with the familiar ache of being second place. "I thought you said you handed everything over." "I did," Adrian said quickly. "But this deal, it's important. I just need to take this one call." Without waiting for her response, he stepped outside onto the porch, leaving Claire alone in the kitchen. She tried to focus on chopping vegetables, but her hands trembled with anger. The sound of Adrian's voice, calm, measured, confident, filtered through the window, a reminder of the man he had been for so long, a man who prioritized business over everything else. When he returned, Claire was sitting at the table, her expression icy. "What was so important it couldn't wait?" she asked, her voice sharp. Adrian sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's a merger, one I've been working on for over a year. The board is nervous because I stepped back and they wanted reassurance." "Reassurance?" Claire repeated, her tone incredulous. "Adrian, do you hear yourself? You promised me you were here, that you'd stepped away to focus on us, and now you're back to taking calls like nothing's changed." "This isn't like before," Adrian insisted. "I'm not going back to work full-time, I just—" "But you couldn't even tell them no," Claire interrupted. "How am I supposed to believe anything's different?" Her words hung in the air like a challenge, and Adrian's shoulders sagged under the weight of her disappointment. "I'm trying, Claire," he said quietly. "I really am." That night, they slept in separate rooms for the first time since Adrian had arrived. The distance between them felt like a chasm, and as Claire lay awake in the dark, she couldn't shake the fear that this was a cycle doomed to repeat itself. The next morning, Adrian was gone. At first, Claire thought he'd left entirely, her heart racing with panic and anger. But then she found a note on the kitchen counter. "Claire, I'm not giving up on us. I just need to take care of a few things. I'll be back soon. Adrian." 2 days passed without any word from him. Claire tried to convince herself she didn't care, but the silence gnawed at her. By the 3rd day, her frustration reached a boiling point. She picked up her phone, scrolling through messages she'd tried to ignore. Adrian had sent her updates, short apologetic notes explaining he was in New York handling the merger, but they only fueled her anger. Finally, she dialed his number, her hands shaking with equal parts fury and fear. He answered on the 2nd ring. "Claire," he said, his voice filled with relief, "I was about to call you." "What the hell are you doing, Adrian?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "You said you were here for us, But the moment work called, you ran back. I didn't run, he said firmly. I came here to make sure I could walk away for good. She paused, his words catching her off guard. What are you talking about? I'm finalizing the deal, Adrian explained. And once it's done, I'm stepping down permanently. I'm selling my shares in the company, Claire. I don't want anything tying me to that life anymore. Her breath caught, a mix of disbelief and cautious hope flooding through her. You're selling everything? Yes, he said. I've realized the company doesn't define me. You and our child, that's what matters. The next time Claire saw Adrian, it was as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He arrived at the cottage looking tired but lighter, his expression filled with a quiet determination. I meant what I said, he told her as they stood on the porch. No more distractions, no more excuses. It's just us now. Claire searched his face, searching for any trace of the man who had once been so consumed by ambition. All she saw was sincerity. The next few weeks passed in a blur of small, steady steps toward rebuilding trust. Adrian became more present, more attuned to Claire's needs. He accompanied her to every doctor's appointment, read parenting books with her, and even painted the nursery a soft, calming blue. But the biggest change wasn't in what Adrian did. It was in how he listened. For the first time in their relationship, Claire felt truly seen and heard, and slowly she began to let her guard down. One evening, as they sat on the beach watching the sunset, Adrian turned to Claire, his expression serious. I know I have a long way to go to prove myself, he said, but I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. Ever. Claire's heart swelled with emotion. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't dared to hope for. Peace. The morning of Claire's due date arrived with an uncharacteristic calm. The coastal town, often accompanied by the steady rhythm of crashing waves, seemed unusually still, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Claire, however, was far from serene. Despite Adrian's unwavering presence over the past months, doubt still lingered in the recesses of her mind. She paced the living room of their modest cottage, her hand resting on her swollen belly. Adrian was in the kitchen preparing breakfast, his movements deliberate and focused. The scent of fresh coffee and buttered toast wafted through the air, but Claire barely noticed. Her thoughts were elsewhere, tangled in the threads of uncertainty. What's on your mind? Adrian's voice broke through her reverie. He stood in the doorway, holding a plate of scrambled eggs and toast, his brow furrowed with concern. Claire stopped pacing, meeting his gaze. What if I'm not ready for this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrian set the plate down and crossed the room to her. He gently took her hands in his touch warm and steady. You're going to be an amazing mother, Claire, he said, his voice filled with quiet conviction. And I'm going to be right here with you every step of the way. She wanted to believe him. Over the past few months, Adrian had shown a side of himself she'd never seen before. A man who was patient, attentive, and deeply committed. But the fear of being let down again lingered, like a shadow that refused to be dispelled. Before she could respond, a sharp pain coursed through her abdomen, stealing her breath. She gasped, clutching Adrian's arm for support. Claire? His voice was laced with panic as he guided her to the couch. What's wrong? She took a shaky breath, her face contorted in pain. I think it's starting. Adrian's eyes widened. The baby? She nodded, gripping the edge of the couch as another contraction rippled through her body. Yes, we need to go to the hospital. The drive to the hospital was a blur of hurried motion and mounting tension. Adrian kept glancing at Claire, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. She tried to stay calm, focusing on her breathing, but the intensity of the contractions made it nearly impossible. When they arrived, a team of nurses whisked her away to a private room. Adrian stayed by her side, his presence a steady anchor in the chaos. He held her hand through every contraction, whispering words of encouragement even as her grip threatened to crush his fingers. You're doing great, he said, his voice steady despite the panic simmering beneath the surface. Just a little longer. Claire shot him a glare between labored breaths. Easy for you to say. Despite the pain, Adrian managed a small smile. Fair point. Hours passed, each one stretching longer than the last. The room was filled with the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the low hum of medical staff bustling in and out. Adrian stayed at Claire's side, his gaze never leaving her face. Finally, the doctor announced it was time. Claire's heart raced as a surge of adrenaline coursed through her. She squeezed Adrian's hand, her eyes meeting his. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised. The delivery was grueling, a whirlwind of pain and effort that left Claire utterly exhausted. But when the sound of a baby's cry filled the room, every ounce of her pain melted away. Tears streamed down her face as the nurse placed a tiny, wriggling bundle in her arms. "It's a boy," the nurse said with a warm smile. Claire stared down at her son, her heart swelling with a love so profound it left her breathless. His tiny fingers curled around hers, and she marveled at the perfect little miracle she had brought into the world. Adrian leaned over her shoulder, his expression a mixture of awe and pure joy. "He's perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Claire looked up at him, tears shining in her eyes. "We did this," she said softly. He nodded, brushing a kiss against her forehead. "You did this, you're incredible." In the days that followed, the cottage was filled with a new kind of chaos. The cries of a newborn, the shuffle of Adrian learning how to change diapers, and the endless stream of visitors from the small town, each one bringing gifts and congratulations. Adrian threw himself into fatherhood with the same determination he had once reserved for his career. He was up for every midnight feeding, every diaper change, and every moment of soothing their son back to sleep. Claire watched him with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief, her walls slowly but surely crumbling. One evening, as they sat on the porch with their son sleeping soundly in his crib, Adrian turned to Claire. The setting sun bathed them in warm, golden light, and for a moment, the world felt still. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice tinged with nervousness. Claire tilted her head, studying him. "What is it?" Adrian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught as he opened it, revealing a delicate diamond ring. "I know I've let you down before," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "But I promise you, Claire, I'm not the same man I was. I've learned what truly matters, and it's you. You and our son. You're my family, my home." He took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving hers. "Will you marry me again? Not because of obligation or appearances, but because I love you. I've always loved you." Tears welled up in Claire's eyes as she looked at the man before her. This was not the Adrian she had married years ago. This was a man who had faced his flaws, who had fought to become better, not for himself, but for her and their child. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you." Adrian's face broke into a radiant smile, and he slipped the ring onto her finger. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as though he never intended to let go. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparations and quiet joy. Their second wedding was a small, intimate affair held on the beach near their cottage. The sun dipped low on the horizon as Claire walked down the makeshift aisle, her dress billowing softly in the breeze. Adrian waited for her at the altar, their son cradled in his arms. When they exchanged vows, there was no pretense, no grandiose promises. Just two people, flawed but deeply in love, committing to build a life together. As the years passed, the little family grew in love and laughter. Adrian never returned to the world of high-stakes business, choosing instead to invest his time in their family and the community. Claire opened a small boutique in town, selling handmade crafts and baby items inspired by her son. And Adrian? He became the kind of father and husband Claire had always hoped for, present, loving, and deeply devoted. One evening, as they sat by the fire with their now toddler son playing at their feet, Claire looked over at Adrian. The light from the flames danced across his face, highlighting the lines etched by time and growth. "You're staring," he said, a teasing smile tugging at his lips. Claire shrugged, her eyes sparkling. "Just thinking about how far we've come." Adrian reached for her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. "I couldn't have done it without you." She leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart full. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly at peace. And as the sound of their son's laughter filled the room, Claire realized that sometimes the hardest journeys led to the most beautiful destinations.